Denmark and the USA are heading into conflict over Greenland. Donald Trump has said he wants to buy Greenland. The Danish PM, Mette Frederiksen, has called the idea absurd.
It was an absurd idea. It was nasty.
He has reacted by saying that was not a very nice comment, and he is even threatening with tariffs or actually a potential invasion. But could there be a solution that would both be positive for the Danish people, for the Greenlanders, and for the USA? Today with me, we have Lars Tvede, who has been asking Chat GPT if there could be an optimal solution. So, of course, this whole scenario is hypothetical, but we just wanted to discover what scenarios could look like and if there are any win-wins that should be examined.
I was sitting in a train to Zurich airport and I was a bit bored. I was sitting in a restaurant wagon and I was just thinking about that whole Greenland situation. So I laid out what I saw as the interest of Danish population, the Inuit population on Greenland, Donald Trump as a person, Western civilization, United States. And then I asked GPT to come with a proposal for an arrangement that would optimize the overall outcome. So it came out with a model, and it literally took, 10 minutes or so. It came out with a model, and I thought it was quite interesting, actually. So just for background, there have been various, we might call it Inuit populations that came from Siberia via Alaska and then into Greenland at different times in distance past. They all disappeared or perished. So when the Norsemen arrived, so North Europeans arrived to Greenland, there were nobody else. It was completely empty. They settled, they stayed there for some hundreds of years, and then they either perished or left. They probably left because they had boats, because it got colder. And then during that time, new migration of Inuits came in. Then the Norsemen came back, and then there's been cohabitation between Danes and Inuits in Greenland. Denmark had an extreme left government led by Anker Jørgensen. The social democratic government made a semi-independency agreement with the Greenland population, so that which includes they have representation in the Danish parliament, but they have quite a lot of self-rule. They get a lot of financial support from Denmark, but they can make a vote to become independent, but it has to be ratified by Denmark. So that is the situation. Now, Greenland is huge. It's about 18 or 20% of the US size, for instance. Also very big compared to Europe. And if we include Greenland in Danish territory, Denmark is the biggest country in Europe. Denmark has a small population, less than 6 million people. Greenland is 56,000 people. A lot of Greenland has never been populated by anybody in the current discussions. So Danish people say that this 56,000 people in Greenland can only really lay claim on the areas where they actually live. So that's if you sort of you draw a line around where the areas where they live and navigate, it's less than, it's something like 15% of Greenland where they are. Most of them living quite closely together. The rest of Greenland is completely fertile. Nobody ever goes there except an occasional expedition, typically from Denmark. The US has obviously strategic interests in Greenland. On the other hand, Denmark has, to my knowledge, never denied the US any request to make bases, Air Force bases, to have weapon systems, monitoring systems, radar stations, etc. in Greenland. So the US cannot argue that it doesn't have this already. Then another situation is that there are a lot of potential mining opportunities in Greenland. However, it's very expensive to start up because you need roads, airports, harbors, etc. to use these mining possibilities. And there's been a very successful endeavor where over a number of years where Denmark has organized the use of cryolites, the mining for cryolite, and I don't even know what it's called in English, but in Greenland, and made some money of that, but a lot less money than Denmark has given Greenland in financial support over the years. I think Donald Trump is a real estate man, and he thinks that if he can increase the territory of the US by 18%, he would forever be remembered as one of the greatest presidents in the US. But there's also a pending lawsuit because of a partly Australian mining company that wanted to do mining for uranium, and then the local rule in Greenland outlaws mining for uranium on Greenland, and they are suing for an absolutely enormous amount. And the lawsuit has some merit according to legal experts, and there's no way the local population could pick up the bill if they lose that. So this is some of the backdrop. Okay, so there have been various estimates of the commercial value of Greenland, and one can say something. This sounds absurd to talk about the price of a country. However, if you look at world history, there have been lots and lots of examples of countries buying and selling land commercially to each other. For instance, the US actually bought Alaska from Russia, by the way. The US bought the middle third, not the coastal areas, but the middle third from Napoleon for almost nothing, and so on. So much of the expansion of US has simply been to buy land from other nations. So they're kind of in the mood to do that. Denmark had the West Indian Islands, and they sold it to the US. So yeah, again, it's happened a lot. So Financial Times and other institutions have made estimates of the commercial value of Greenland based on partly what you could make from mining rights if you don't have the threat of investing a lot, and then certainly the local rule outlaws what you're doing, but you actually have it under legal control. And one way of looking at it is that you want a 7% annualized return, but you can also factor in what you can make of tourism and other things. So estimates are around $1,200 to $1,500 billion. So the deal that GPS, with some help from me, came up with was that the US buys the part of Greenland which is unpopulated, and that would be something like 85% of Greenland, or and they pay $1,200 billion for that, which sounds like a lot of money, but it corresponds to 4.8% of America's GDP. I think Donald Trump would be absolutely delighted to pay 4.8% of US GDP for making this huge territorial expansion and getting these mining rights under control. Also, in terms of geopolitical tension and negotiations, you don't actually need to be mining Greenland. The fact that you just have the possibility to mine it at some point in the future where prices go up, or technologies make it cheaper, or climate change may make it easier, is in itself of a big geopolitical significance. And also it will show, for instance, Russia or China, that it's much smarter to buy land than it is to attack and try to conquer land militarily, which is very, very expensive in these days. So it would show America as being the smart player in the big geopolitical competition, whereas other ones are kind of old-fashioned.
Let's just pause here for a while, just to look at how much more effective it would actually be to purchase land rather than fighting for it militarily, at least if we look at the invasion of Ukraine from 2022 to 2025. So even if, and that is still an if, Russia is able to keep the occupied land, it would come at a much steeper price than the US would realistically be able to buy Greenland for. Of course, you can discuss the value of the land, but Greenland is quite valuable from a strategic point of view and also from a minerals point of view. So the total cost of buying 85% of Greenland might be around double of what Russia has spent and lost as a result of the Ukraine war. But the territory of Greenland they would buy if they bought 85% would be more than 16 times larger. So the cost price for Russia is actually more than 8 times more expensive. And of course, the ramifications in terms of the global standing is much worse for Russia. So the outcome of buying land rather than fighting for it militarily, in this case, is much more favorable in terms of buying it. And of course, we haven't even begun to consider the humanitarian disaster that a war is. Absolutely terrible. Let's hope this will be a lesson for countries not to engage in wars in the future.
So then what about the population in Greenland? They could be offered dual passport, so Danish and American passport, which means that they would have access to, at any time, to move to either country if they want, or move forth and back as they want. They could each inhabitant could get a signing bonus of 1.4 million Danish kroner, which is what is that? That's about $200,000 tax-free, regardless of age. So for a family of 4, that would be really a very significant amount. You could have 2 sovereign wealth funds, one for a small one for the very tiny Inuit population, and then a big one for Denmark. The one for Denmark would be, this makes more sense for a Danish person, but 8,600 billion Danish kroner, which is makes it comparable to the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund. And if you assume that the long-term average return is similar to what the Norwegians have, which is about 6.5%, then you could keep reinvesting the part that just compensates for inflation, and then you could distribute the rest to the state of Denmark every year. And that would make it possible to reduce corporate taxes, and these are rough estimates, but reduce corporate taxes in Denmark to 15%, so similar to Switzerland, roughly, to cut the marginal tax rate from the horrific, like 65% that it is now, to around 30 or 35%, which is also similar to Switzerland, to some of Switzerland, because other parts of Switzerland is 20%. And to cut VAT from 25% to 8 to 10%.
Let's look at this suggested plan. So we're looking at lowering the corporate tax, reduce the personal tax, and reducing the VAT. And included in the personal tax will also be tax on, for example, value increases on bonds. So the reason it is really hard to calculate the actual cost is that there are dynamic effects. For example, there have been made estimates that removing the top tax, the 15% top tax completely, would actually not cost anything, as people would work more and therefore the total tax revenue would be increased. For example, looking at taxing stock gains, well, it actually amounts to nothing or almost nothing in Denmark compared to other countries, because people simply do not invest a lot of money in stocks due to the high tax. So there are a lot of dynamic effects at play. And therefore it is, of course, hard to estimate exactly how much taxes could be lowered, but our best guess is what we're seeing on the screen here.
So this would make Denmark one of the 3 really wealthy nations in Europe, the other 2 being Norway and Switzerland. And then Denmark would also become really, really wealthy. And if it does it like this, the way I described, it would remain really, really wealthy for as long as eyes can see. I think, obviously, first of all, Denmark should go into negotiations telling the U.S. negotiators that Denmark and the Inuits will take the proposal up for a referendum, or at least Denmark will do it. This is always a good way to negotiate. Also like if I say, yeah, I can negotiate with you, but my boss needs to approve the outcome of our talks. Put some pressure to get to find an attractive deal. So I think there would be an overwhelming majority in Denmark for anything along the lines of this. Both because you would still have the relationship with the Inuits. So second, because Denmark would be in a completely different place forever after. It would be incredibly wealthy, and Greenland would be secured militarily forever after. So it's for me, it's really, really difficult to see what the downside is, but the upside is massive.
So this sums up Chat GPT's suggestion of how we can resolve the political crisis between Denmark, the US, and Greenland. Would this be a solution that is worth considering? It is probably a very sensitive area, and Lars and I do not think this is very realistic. But on the other hand, it is worth to mention that from the standpoint of the Inuits in Greenland, they would be much, much richer than they are today, and they would have the choice of both going to the US and Denmark and taking advantages of what is offered there. Also, they would actually still be part of rigsfællesskabet, as the US would only buy the uninhabited areas. Denmark would become a whole lot richer, one of the richest countries in Europe, and could improve living standards by up to 25%. And the US would also be seen as victors in this, increasing their landmass quite significantly. So it does sound like a win-win, but maybe it is not plausible. Let us hear your thoughts in the comments.